Increasingly, through selective breeding, the differences between rulers and ruled will increase until they are almost different species. That's what mathematician Bertrand Russell said, capturing the predatory dominance behind the spirit of the eugenics movement. The vision was to transcend man. What nature does slowly, humans could do swiftly through genetics. Sir Francis Galton, first cousin of Charles Darwin, coined the term eugenics, and through the Royal Society in London brought it to prominence. Powerful and wealthy industrialists who'd concentrated huge monopolies at the height of the Industrial Revolution seized upon the elitist treatise, fueling an international movement for eugenics as a means of keeping the masses of humanity under their yoke. Human labor lost value under the rise of technology. Life had become cheap, as an emerging scientific dictatorship made man a mere cog in a vast machine. Eugenics became more than just a policy to guide reproduction wisely. It evolved into many branches of control under state power. From eugenic sterilization laws in the United States and Britain, to the extermination policies of the Nazis and other dictators, to controls on the use of resources, carbon taxes, and the number of children families can have, the New World Order emerged from the shadows, and the state religion of population control became an all-out war against the individual and family. Good evening. I'm Aaron Dykes, and this is another InfoWars Special Report. Tonight, we're going to go in-depth and look into the eugenics movement and what it means for our modern society and how we came to be mere pets in this system which seeks total control under the New World Order. What is eugenics? It's an elitist philosophy for a transhuman man which leaves behind the husk of the underclass. It's a way to wipe out the regular man and devalue human labor. We've reduced ourselves to being nothing more than inventory in a complex system under this nation and under this global treaty. There really is population control in the literal sense going on this planet, and we're tagged, traced, and numbered. Everyone knows about the complications, the risks, and the horrifying nightmares produced by RFID, tracking technology. What will happen if we have a chip under us? Facial scans, iris scans, recognition. Where did that all come about? To find out, we have to go back to the roots of the modern eugenics system. Back in 1883, when Sir Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, coined eugenics and made it a movement that would transform our modern society, especially in the Western world. Francis Galton developed the first system of biometrics, including fingerprints for criminal identification. He also developed supposed theories for racial hygiene, for improvement, for supposed positive eugenics, where the elites could breed and expect to increase their fold. Instead, his family, the Huxleys and the others who bred with him, disintegrated into halfway intelligent and halfway just disturbed human beings with lots of problems. But the system he set up emerged not only in the UK, where he was part of the Royal Society of London, but also in the US at the Eugenics Record Office at Cold Springs Harbor Laboratory on the East Coast, where in the early 1900s, some of the most wealthy industrialists, including the Carnegie family, the Harrimans, and the Rockefellers, set up a centralized records office where they sent field workers out to talk to ordinary people to collect data, height, sex, history, number of people in the family, bloodlines, racial information, and centralize it all, hair samples, try to analyze it and try to figure out who was worth sterilizing and leaving behind in this world and who was worth breeding to increase the numbers of supposedly good humans. The use of IBM-developed Hollerith punchcards started being used in 1890 for the first U.S. census using modern scientific technology. This punch card allowed them to classify all these vital statistics and use the data to selectively analyze the population they were trying to control. That technology was further used by the eugenicist clique at Cold Springs Harbor for what was known as the Jamaican race mixing study, where in 1927 they studied the supposed benefits, risks, and tendencies of race mixing between, generally speaking, Negro and white populations and the so-called mulatto populations, all in Jamaica. That technology soon transferred over to Nazi Germany. These eugenic sterilization laws were not unique to Nazi Germany, though. The United States had these laws in more than 27 U.S. states, I believe 33 all told, set up starting in the early 1920s, but they didn't end until the late 70s and even early 80s, all disgracefully targeting the autonomy of the family and the individual, challenging the right to reproduce, and trying to bring in this eugenics world society. For a little more perspective on how bureaucracy became so tyrannical, let's look at the quote from Carroll Quigley, historian for the elite and author of Tragedy and Hope. He said that the modern man, the 20th century supposedly democratic man, will, in general, have his freedom and choice controlled within very narrow alternatives by the fact that he will be numbered from birth and followed as a number through his educational training, through his required military and other public service, through his tax contributions, through his health and medical requirements, and his final retirement and death benefits. Carroll Quigley warned us, or was simply observing, that we are a number from birth to death under this eugenics New World Order system, which is a centralized control system using the modern industrial technology. How did this become so dangerous? Well, it was the elites, including those who were already dominant and those who became dominant at the height of the Industrial Revolution, who established these super monopolies, which we know, the Rockefeller oil monopoly, the Carnegie steel monopoly, and the Harriman railroad monopoly, very emblematic of that. They paired up with the rising collectivist models, not only socialism and communism, but fascism, Nazism, which is National Socialism, and also the kind of New Deal set up under the FDR system and other similar systems. We continue in one version or another of that system today. We have our Social Security numbers and all the other things just mentioned by Carroll Quigley. So we have baby's blood and databases. We have the Human Genome Project, which tries to analyze our racial data and draw conclusions and supposedly provide a more promising future. But what else are they using that for? And why does this collective model become so psychopathic? Let's look at a naked statement from George Bernard Shaw, a leading Fabian socialist who led the promise of socialism, which may sound like a good idea. They're going to take care of you. But look at that logo behind him. That's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He wasn't talking about a friendly socialism. He was talking about how under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed whether you liked it or not. But if it were discovered that you had not the character and industry enough to be worth all this trouble, you might be possibly executed in a kindly manner. But whilst you were permitted to live, you would have to live well. But however you lived, you would be a cog of the state, servile to this centralized system. Now, today we have the post-World War II United Nations system, which itself has branches. UNESCO, the branch for education, science, and culture, headed by eugenicist Julian Huxley, who's from that original eugenics family, which included the Darwins, the Galtons, and T.H. Huxley, who was the elder grandfather of the author, Aldous Huxley, and Julian Huxley, the first head of UNESCO, also a transhumanist. You also have the United Nations Population Fund, which makes gross characterizations and recommendations, especially in developing and third world countries. You also have mechanisms like the World Bank and the IMF, now in the present day, using loan availability to supposedly improve and develop these countries as a condition to meet population reduction goals. Yes, there are population reduction goals, and the deep secret is that there's a global population database apparatus in use, not necessarily centralized in one location or another, but continued through the philosophy of these eugenicists and the collectivists, used today in our bureaucratic systems, but also used to analyze our supposed racial data and our supposed worth as human beings. We're looking now at a chart of the top foundations who were giving to population control causes in the year 2000. You can see that in the case of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hundreds of millions of dollars a year are going to causes including, but certainly not limited to, abortion. You also have other top technocrats like the David and Lucille Packard Foundation of Hewlett-Packard, the other computer company, also giving hundreds of millions of dollars. The Ford Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, the other half of HP, the Rockefeller Foundation, MacArthur, the Ted Turner Foundation, and the George Soros Open Society Institute, all contributing to overt and covert population control causes, especially in the developing and third world. Now let's take an even closer look at the Rockefeller Foundation, a prime example in the modern-day eugenics movements. They were, of course, very powerful industrial family, of course allied with even bigger families like the Rothschilds. And they learned that their oil empire was hated, especially in America, in the early parts of the 20th century. They were funding the birth control movement headed by Margaret Sanger. They were also funding the Nazi Germany Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, which was a huge vehicle for the entire Western European eugenics movement. They were further funding social engineering through many of the universities, including Caltech University in California, where they sought to use the early eugenics even before they discovered the full potential and exact mechanism of DNA, at least officially. And they were using some of the most famous scientists in the world to pursue research and development towards the biochemical engineering of man, to remake him into a compliant and willing servant of the state. They were literally using the emerging genetics and DNA information, what they knew about breeding in the genome, to produce the sort of citizens they wanted in what was already becoming the post-industrial world. You see, after the rise of machinery and centralized technology, the modern state, human labor